We've all heard of the Ford F-150 Raptor, the pickup truck designed to bomb across the desert with long travel suspension and big shocks. Well, how about the Ford Bronco Raptor? This is wider than a normal Bronco, has a bigger engine than a normal Bronco, has massive shocks compared to a normal Bronco, and it comes on 37-inch tall tires from the factory. On this First Drives with Fred, we're going to try and figure out, is this the best Bronco Ford has ever made? Spoiler alert, this is the best Bronco Ford's ever made. It's awesome. So what makes the Bronco Raptor different than a normal Bronco? Well, the normal Broncos have the 2.3 inline 4-cylinder and the 2.7 V6, both of them with turbos. This has a 3-liter twin turbo EcoBoost engine. So it's bigger engine, more power, and it has a wider stance, a wider track width. And because of that wider track width, because the suspension is different, the arms are different, the shocks are different, the truck has a 37-inch tall tire and these big flares, which when they first came out, a lot of people were complaining that the flares were ugly. When I first saw them, I was like, that's not very good. But when I actually have been living with this one for a week, I was like, you know what? It's really not that bad. Like the flares, you kind of love them or hate them. And I'm 100% sure that the aftermarket will come up with options to change them. Because when Ford developed the Bronco, they wanted to go right after Wrangler and make a vehicle that was customizable. There's so many people in the aftermarket that will make things for the Bronco and for the Bronco Raptor. And if you think that someone's going to say, well, why would you modify a Bronco Raptor if it's such a good truck? Look at normal Raptor F-150s. They've been getting customized from day one. And in fact, when I was at the Off-Road magazine and the Ford Raptor F-150 came out, a lot of us were like, wow, why would you ever change that? It's so awesome. And then overnight, people were still changing them. They were like, I want different shocks. I want different everything. So over the years, a lot of people have modified the Raptor editions of the F-150, and then we're sure that we'll do that to the Bronco as well. It's kind of like the Jeep Rubicon. Even though it's a Rubicon and it has locking differentials and low gears and disconnectable sway bar, people still change them and modify them all the time. And speaking of Jeep, like I'm a diehard Jeep guy. I've had a bunch of Jeeps. I don't think Jeep offers anything from the factory right now that can compete with this vehicle in certain types of terrain. And that is going fast off-road. I think that this thing works so good going fast, and most of that is because of the shocks. The shocks, I mean, the wider stance is great, the engine is great, but I feel like the shocks just allow it to soak up the terrain so much better. And not that Jeep couldn't do that. Jeep does offer things. They offer the Mojave, which has big shocks, and they offer the 392 Jeep that has a lot of horsepower, but they don't have anything that has the shock technology that this has. In fact, the only thing in the Jeep family isn't even a Jeep. It's a Ram, which is kind of under the same Stellantis family. And the Ram TRX is the only other real competitor I see as a go-fast off-road vehicle to this and to the Raptor F-150. So I see Ford having the Raptor name as like, this is our vehicle that is designed to go fast in the dirt. Where, I mean, it can still rock crawl. It still has like the low range and the rock crawling settings and the locking differentials and the disconnectable sway bars. But it's really like comes alive when you're going fast over stuff. I drove it through the desert and I bombed around in it, and like even just like in front of my shop, there's a place where I can come off the main road and just dive into a big old ditch and then into the parking lot, and it just seems to soak that up better than anything that I've had before. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, you can build a solid axle rig that can go really fast and soak up big whoops, but Jeep doesn't currently offer anything like that in that arena. Will a Jeep out rock crawl or out trail wheel a Bronco Raptor? I mean, I like the reliability of solid axles, and I think that Jeep they've always been great in the rocks, but like this thing is no slouch. It will still rock crawl, it'll still run trails, and it will go fast over terrain that's a point where Jeep hasn't shown up with the type of shock technology. What is that shock technology? Well, internal bypass shocks, live valve tuning. This thing talks to the ECU, the steering, the brakes, the yaw, the pitch, how much the shocks have moved already, and it calculates all this stuff like 100 times a second, and in a millisecond it will change so that it is ready to stop the vehicle from nosediving or bottoming out. It's kind of amazing how well this thing works. In fact, I'm just going to drive it and talk about it because it's so fun. It's a different type of fun than most of the Jeeps that I've driven. It's not as quick, like it's definitely not as quick as the 392. I feel like you can stand on it and it makes a lot of noise, but it doesn't necessarily like take off. But it just seems to like soak up the rough roads better, especially when it's one of those like, oh, poop hits where you're like bombing along and you're like, uh-oh. The other thing is right now, this is aired up to street pressure. And so it does have a little bit more chop, I would say. I think it's at like high 30s or low 40s. I think if I was gonna desert bomb it more, I would probably bring it down into the 20s, mid to low 20s, just for the going fast, if not lower. This also has Ford's beadlock wheels on it, which allow you to change it from just a wheel with a kind of a beauty ring to a legit beadlock that clamps the tires and allows you to air it down really low. So if you wanted to air down into the single digits, you could do that. Why would you do that? Well, that's to spread the tire out and get more traction on things, especially when trail wheel and rock crawling. What do you think, Batman? Back seat comfortable? I like the Bronco. I think that Ford really has had it tough with the Bronco. I mean, they tried to launch, or a relaunch, I guess I would say, an Icon, and that happened right during a global pandemic. There's been all types of global back orders on everything from microchips to what have you. And then Ford's like, well, we want to come out with a brand new vehicle and we want to compete with Wrangler and we want to be better than Wrangler. And it's like, well, that's kind of a hard thing to do because, I mean, Jeep hasn't stopped making Wranglers and open top vehicles like for their entirety of their business history. Ford was making Broncos and then they kind of stopped. So like you're behind the 8 ball. You're trying to get caught up in an industry that your competition hasn't stopped. They've just continually been growing. Now, I think it's great because Ford has the opportunity to come in with all new systems and designs, and everything is different. They don't have certain parameters that they have to stick to, where I feel like Jeep maybe does. Oh, this is a really cool road. So why would I say that these Broncos are the best Broncos Ford have ever made? Well, let's compare. The early Broncos are awesome. They're an icon. They're very boxy styling, solid axles front and rear, coil springs in the front, leaf springs in the rear, full removable top. They are what started this whole brand. So I love those. However, they didn't really have a whole lot of power, and like this thing, the technology in this, the performance in this truck so far surpasses what was available back then. Do I think that the early Broncos looked better than the Bronco of today and the Bronco Raptor? Well, sure, but that's always the case. Like an early flat fender Jeep is better looking than a modern Jeep. Like all of the originals always looked better. The styling of those is almost 100% better looking than whatever the latest version of a vehicle is. Moving on from that, you have the full-size Broncos, which were cool, don't get me wrong, and they were available with big V8 engines, but I don't know that any of those V8 engines made as much power as this EcoBoost V6. It's twin turbo engine, and it has a 10-speed automatic transmission behind it, so that it can have that V6 in the perfect power band at all times. Plus, on top of that, you couldn't get a full-size Bronco, or any Bronco for that matter, with selectable lockers front and rear and a disconnectable sway bar. Moving on from the full-size Broncos, then you have the later 80s and 90s Broncos that had the twin traction beam front suspension. Nothing wrong with TTB. You can build them into these great off-road pre-runner trucks. But from the factory to have 3-inch internal bypass Fox shocks with live valve tuning so that it can adjust in a split second from 100 different bits of information, whether it's steering, brakes, ECU, yaw, pitch. All of those factors can go into the suspension alone just to tell the thing how to ride better and how to deal with rough terrain when you're hitting things at speed. I'm sorry, as much as I like all of the earlier Broncos, none of them compare to what this thing can do. Do I dislike the look of these giant flares? I did when I first saw it. Now, it's not that big a deal to me. So if you want to have your cake and a bowl of ice cream and eat it too, this is definitely the Bronco for you. It has the best suspension, probably the best running engine and transmission combo ever offered. The drivability, the performance, it's just an all-around fun vehicle. And you can still take the top off. It comes on 37-inch tall tires. Maybe it doesn't look as cool as the earlier versions, but when you're driving it, you don't even see the fender flares that so many people love or hate. So it's got to be the best thing Ford has ever offered with a Bronco badge. Is it inexpensive? No way. $80,000 is what this vehicle is listed at. And because Ford has been having issues with getting Broncos out to buyers and to dealers, the dealerships have just racked up the price even more, to the point where it's like $100,000. Probably a little bit excessive for a Bronco with a Raptor kit, but it's still a really fun vehicle. And I'm sure over time, these vehicles will come down in price. Man, it is just a fun truck to drive. Even on the street, it's fun for carving canyons and bombing around mountain roads. All right, that's it for this First Drives with Fred. We'll see you guys next time.